Beep beep, what is up guys? What is up ninjas? My name is Semrold and this is the complete guide to master Spire. In this series you're going to learn how to utilize Spire to make sounds like you've always wanted to make, as well as maneuver your presets so that you can make your preset sound yours. There's nothing wrong with using presets. This series is to just give you guys intellectual power so that if you ever have a preset and you're like, man, it would be so cool if it sounded this way, you could change it. Or if you ever wanted to make a sound in Spire and you're like, man, I wish I could make this sound, then you can make it, guys. So this is going to be episode 1, which is the Oscillator section of Spire, and it's where your sound design journey is gonna begin. I hope that you guys enjoy this series. Make sure to hit like and leave a comment down below if you do. I have one for Silent 1 that you can find at the end of this video. There's gonna be a little pop-up and you can check it out, as well as a free SOundbank for you guys to download for Spire in the description link down below in honor of December, Christmas time. With that being said, ninjas, let's get started. Alright guys, now Spire is a synthesizer made by Reveal Sound that takes digital stuff and analog stuff and forms it together to make a very massive synthesizer. It came out around 2015, I want to say, and this was around the time of the big EDM boom. I remember when it first came out, a lot of trance artists were pushing it, in terms of like a lot of trance artists were using it right off the bat. They literally got it and they were picking it up because it's very similar to a Virus TI, which, as you guys know, is one of the synths of the 2000s, really helped shape a sound. Now Spire is going to be a very dance music synth. That's what it was aimed towards, so I can kind of see why many people like it. We have people like Brooks using it. That's all he uses, I believe, in a little bit of Serum. We have people like Armin endorsing it, Ferry Corsten, and a lot of the big guys. So definitely a synth you want to have in your arsenal. You can make very luscious leads in it. You can make very nasty bass lines in it if you put the time and effort into it. And with this series, you're going to be able to do that. Now let's go straight into the oscillator section where our journey begins. So here is going to be our oscillator section. As you can see, we're going to have 1, 2, 3 little boxes. This is going to be our oscillator section. When you switch between oscillators, you're going to have different settings for each. So if oscillator 3 has 0% white, oscillator 4 is going to have a different one. Now in oscillator 1, we're going to begin. So pretty much, you know, Reveal Sound is going to start with very standard subtractive synthesis, which is like Silent 1, and wavetable synthesis, which is like Serum, which you can utilize wavetables that are pretty much just things that change over time, and you insert that into the synthesizer and you get something. For instance, let's say we distort a saw, and we'll just do that here, you don't have to know that. Then I can turn that into a wavetable. And then my wavetable position now, which you can find here, will decide where in that area I like my sound to be, or if I want to have it move over time, like, then that's when I can add certain other things from Spire to make that happen. But just keep that in mind, just a little kind of a little teaser of the future of how we can use wavetables. Now, first thing is we're going to have here the different kinds of modes in Spire. We're going to have classic, noise, FM, frequency modulation, AM sync, SAW PWM, pulse width modulation, and then we're going to have hard FM, which is hard frequency modulation. The AM, if you have to know, stands for amplitude modulation, and if you took math, it's the same thing. When you do your coordinate point system, it talks about the amplitude. That's literally what we're doing there, amplitude modulation as well. Okay, so with that being said, guys, here we're going to have the pitch controls at the very top. We're going to have the note, which, as you guys know, if I'm playing an F and I move this note +1, this oscillator will play at F sharp. +3, then you can count up your semitones, you know, 1, 2, 3, and that's going to be a G sharp, G. Now these are very useful for your when you're making big layered sounds that you want to have some harmonics into them. We'll talk about making those after we go through the oscillator section and how to utilize that. The next thing we have is the fine, which is going to be kind of in between notes. You know how we have the F and then the F sharp. In between that, there's this part where people tend to say, oh, that singer's not in tune. Those are frequencies that are going to be hit with the fine. So very simple there. We can go negative and positive on there. Then we have our octaves, which again is going to decide how much of an octave up are we going to play from the original note. So if I'm playing, let's say at F or F1 or F2, let's say, if I put this up an octave, then this oscillator will play at F3, which is an octave. Very simple concepts there. Now this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting in Spire. We're going to have Control A and Control B, which will affect different things depending on what kind of mode you're in. In classic mode, we can turn our saw into a square by using Control A. So if you use synthesizers like Massive or like Serum, where you have, like, let's say a wavetable that goes from a saw to a square, this is what you're kind of emulating. Now, when you have the Control A up, that's when Control B will activate in classic mode. And what Control B is going to do very simply is just do pulse width modulation, or pulse width. You can say pulse width change. What that means is, as you know, there is this big line in the center of a square wave. You can see that there. And we're just going to be moving that. Now, the change that happens to that, you know, there's probably like a more academic description I could give you, but the change that you need to understand that happens is your sound tends to get thinner the more farther away you get from that center line. And to the left, you can kind of see that. So there you can kind of see what we're going to be using that for. If you want a very thinnish square like an H pulse or a Q pulse from silent, then you would use this to get that. And you can also modulate that to kind of get that. Very simple there. So moving that's pretty much what Control A and Control B are going to do when we have classic mode set up. Next thing we have is the phase here, and the phase is just going to be the starting position of the wavetable. So if you notice when we move it, there's this little orange line. Where do we want to start on that wavetable? You can kind of say yourself that if we start at the very peak of, let's say, a sine wave, so if we put in a sine, it would sound a lot bigger, but a lot of times that's not the case, and it tends to work a little bit better when you LFO it to change it, move it, so it gets a very wiggly effect that we can barely hear right now. But we'll talk more about the phase when we get to it, like where it starts to matter a lot. The next thing we have is a wavetable mix. So that's going to be pretty much here. We're going to be able to select our wavetables. We're going to have various different ones. Sadly, we cannot import any, but let's say we have a synth one and we put in the wavetable mix, then you're going to have kind of like a saw and whatever wavetable you pick variant. And then with Control B, you can kind of select a portion of that wavetable that you like. So it's going to be pretty kind of cool to have. Control A really doesn't do anything much here. So that's going to be our wavetable mix there, and you can use different wavetables like bass. Now this is where it starts to get a little bit hard. We're going to go into the next mode, which is the noise mode. Now here, Control B is going to control the resonation point of that low pass or high pass filter that you're going to select with Control A. Here we have the low cut, and here we have the high cut. Now with the octave section, you can control where your frequency is being cut off. So if we were to use, let's say, like a high cut or something, like a low cut, and we'll use this section here to explain this. Hopefully it can kind of say, let's say this is a low cut. The higher you play, the more this is going to go up. So what that means is if I have, let's say here, this cut, if I play high, it's going to let more of it out. But if I have the high cut, then we're going to be kind of closing that filter. It's a weird way of working for sure, but this is how we use the noise section. And you would want to use that in case, you know, you're already using up your two filters and you still want to have some white noise on the sound. Then we would have to utilize Control A, Control B, and a pitch features to kind of get that nice kind of vibe we want to get. Now, FM mode is one of the reasons why I like Spire. Whenever I want to make simple FM sounds, Spire is my go-to because it's just so fast to do it. We go into FM mode, we're going to have a sine, and it's that simple. Use Control A to apply the frequency modulation. Control B will apply the frequency modulation, the how much it happens. So pretty much what it means is that if you go up, you're increasing the frequency. But keep in mind, this is more fine, so you are not going to be in key when you move it, so you got to be really careful with it. And then, you know, one of the things I'll say is you can go 9, 12, or 9 or 3 o'clock to kind of get a different harmonic than the one we have. So let's say we have, let's say, a wavetable FM like this. We can put like the +7 version by having this be at around, let's say, 3 o'clock. And it's going to stay in key. But if I put it around here, it's not in key. So you got to be really careful with this one, guys. Now, the wavetable mix is just going to mix, you know, the wavetable mix, and it works in conjunction with the Control B. But however, if you have a full wavetable mix, you're not going to have Control A. So just keep that in mind. It's a very nice one to use. FM mode is super cool, and the phase does the same thing. The note and the fine do the same thing, and the octave does the same thing. There's not going to be any different pitch intervals there. And then you can choose different ones here, like guitar. Alright guys, now in AM sync mode, we're going to have Control A, which controls pretty much the saw to square. We're going to have Control B, which controls the modulation frequency of this. So here we have a standard saw, kind of like a little bit of a mixture here with a sine. And then you're increasing that frequency, so you get higher pitch. Square. And a saw. Then you can apply a sine if you want to give it that sync effect. You can also have a guitar. Now, notice how when we have the wavetable mix all the wave, Control A doesn't work. Kind of seen a recurring pattern here. Phase does the exact same thing. So as you can see, AM Sync just changes Control A and Control B parameters. Now, guys, the next one is going to be the saw PWM, saw pulse width modulation. By default, you're going to have the pulse width there, but let's say you don't want it for some reason, Control B all the way to the left, and you have a normal saw. Move that up, and now you have that pulse width. Now, Control A is going to control the different saw PWM wavetables that Spire is going to have. So when we add more, you have 2, 3, and more. Now, they all sound different. As you can see, that sounds more of a square, and then you can control that modulation to kind of get really cool sounds out of it. The saw PWM is cool to make very trancy sounds, as we'll see in the future. And then here we're going to have the wavetable knob again, which, you know, Control A is just going to apply sort of like a remap mode effect that Serum has, in that it kind of makes the wavetable repeat, which gives you a higher frequency. Very simple. And then the wavetable Control B controls kind of like the phase of it in a way. You can see. Very simple there, as we can see. Now, Hard FM is one of the newer modes inside of Spire, and it's actually one of the weirder ones because it's similar to FM, but it works a little bit differently. Control A still controls our frequency modulation. Control B will act as a detunement knob here, so at 9 AM, you're going to have the bass normal note. But then once we start going up, notice how it doesn't change gradually. It changes all of a sudden instantly when we move Control B. There is a graph I do want you to see, which is going to be this one, which tells you where Control B is doing at what certain points. So make sure to check that out, and make sure to read the manual if you can as well, to kind of just learn the academic definition of these guys. But pretty much that's what Control B is going to do. Now, the sign here, as you can see, the wavetable mix, it doesn't do anything until we have some Control A action. Now, the definition in the manual, and I had to look this up, was that pretty much the wavetable that is below the sign, so if we have a sign, then we have a try, you're going to have a mixture of both of them when you have that added. So we can have a buy-in, and then a buy-in 2. So that's pretty much what we're going to be seeing there. Sort of meant to act sort of like a sub-oscillator effect, which means it would kind of help when you have very high frequency sound. As you can see, we can kind of hear that next try over here kind of coming in there. So it's really cool for that kind of stuff, to kind of get that sub-oscillator so you don't lose that kind of body to your sound. And then we have the phase, which does the same shit like every other mode. Now, the next section is going to be the Unison section, guys. Gladly, this section has very little compared to the normal one, the wave section. So we're going to have access to really cool stuff here. Pretty much here's where you're going to decide how many voices you want in this oscillator to come out. For instance, let's say an oscillator when we want 8. Then we're going to have 8 voices coming out. And this settings here on this one and this one are going to differ from oscillator 2, oscillator 3, and oscillator 4. Detunement is going to grab each saw and detune it so that they're not the same pitch, which creates that nice lush effect to create super saws. Density is a unique parameter to Spire, which means it works in an irregular way. That's the way they say it. But it's just going to affect how the saws are working in conjunction with each other when they're detuned, aka the modulation, the change in speed of them. Okay, and then we can have 9. Very simple there. Now, in Unison mode, we can have up to 9 voices, which would kind of be like a hyper saw, as many people would state. I think the Virus TI was one of the first ones to do this. Then there's also like an ultra saw now, which is weird. Below that, we have kind of like the parameters to kind of have this one play up 2 octaves. So if you have 2 voices, it will cover 2 octaves. Let's undo 2. And then 3 octaves. You have to have 3 voices for that one. And then we're going to have the chords. And this is really cool if you're making kind of like tech house or house, because now we have... Every voice is going to play a different note. So instead of you going into each oscillator, kind of making, okay, this one's going to be +3 and then +7, you can do it via here, and that saves a lot of time. And you can switch between them. Very simple, as you guys can see. From there, we're going to have the mix section, or, you know, it's like to call the white section. This is one of the reasons why I love Spire, and it's going to be this white knob here. When you have more than one voice, the white knob is going to make those voices kind of spread out, and this is where you create kind of like pseudo stereo, and you can hear it in 8 voices. And this parameter only works when you have more than one voice. Here it's in mono. Then we let that be white. One of my favorite things in Spire. It's so simple to use. It's just one knob, but it's one of the reasons why I like it, because you can create different layers for a sound. Now, the next thing we have is the ANA setting, which is going to be very simple to use. ANA on just means that it's going to act as a free running oscillator, which means that the phase is just going to keep running. And then with it off means that it's always going to start at random positions. So pretty much the phase won't matter. It will start randomly anywhere. So it doesn't really do much, as I've noticed, so I usually don't pay much attention to it because I don't see any result from it. Now the next one is inversion, which we invert the oscillator. It's just inverting the phase or inverting the saw. And then we have the key. So with it on, it follows the key. With it off, it doesn't. Then we have panning left and right and filter inputs there. So panning, I don't need to explain. Filter inputs, well, you can send it to filter 2 or filter 1, as we'll talk about in the next episode. But in this episode, we learned a lot from the oscillator section, guys. The last thing I really do need to say is that we have up to 4 oscillators, and you can switch between them here. You can copy one oscillator and paste it onto the next oscillator, because let's say you want to make a super saw. Just copy oscillator 1, put in oscillator 2, change a little bit of the parameters, and you have that. All right, guys, now let's make some sounds just using these 3 sections here. And I suggest you guys do the same and practice, because this is where the sound design journey begins. So let's make a standard just super saw, which would be 8 voices and some detunement. This is one of the easier sounds to me. Let's make it wide using the white knob. We have a nice sounding saw there. It's very cool. And then we can kind of control that to a square, as you know. Control B to get that pulse width modulation there. Move it a bit. Now from here, we can create sort of like a pad. For instance, this can be kind of like the bottom part of it. And then we'll create another one here, an oscillator 2, and we can switch between them. And here, let's kind of make this one into a square. Make it 8 voices as well. Make it in the center of the mix. And then, you know, we want to kind of see that, you know, we have the stereo field and the mono field. So that's why the white knob is so helpful, because we can kind of say, all right, this is on the sides of the mix, and this is in the center. Make this up an octave. Now from here, you can add various different types of harmonics. What that means is, remember the note section? We can go +7 to get the perfect 5th, I believe that's going to be called. +7. You can see there. We can also do a +3 if you want. Get a different kind of vibe out of it as well. That's how we're going to be using that sound to create. Now let's create another one. Let's create an FM sound. Let's go into hard FM. We'll use the sine, lower it down 2 octaves. I like the way it sounds like there. A very nice G-house sound. And let's add another layer that will be kind of like the side layer. We'll use FM as well. Let's use a sine and a normal FM. Let's make this be wide 2 voices. Lower it maybe down to -1. So right now we don't have access to the filter or the envelopes yet, because we've only learned this part. That's the way I want you to see it and create sounds based on it. And practice just with that, because with that you can create really good sounds right off the bat, guys. One last one. Let's do one using maybe, let's say, the saw PWM. Remember that we have that pulse width here. So let's put 2 maybe. Let's put 8 voices and D2. You know, and that I don't really like to saw PWM unless you're really using a filter and reverb, because it sounds very kind of squarish to me, and I don't like the vibe on it. Other than that, guys, so you guys can see, we can make various different sounds in classic mode, in all the different kinds of modes, and you have various different wavetables to play with. You know, here you don't even need to have. You can make a bass with that. You can do so much. But in next episode, guys, we're going to be learning how to use the filter, and then we're going to create sounds at the end of the video to using the filter to make certain pads and certain sounds, and then we'll move on to the envelope LFO section, onto the effects, onto the last one, and then we will talk about the stepper, the ARP, and all the other stuff that you can find in Spire. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a very long one because it has different kinds of modes, but I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time, ninjas. You guys take care. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you guys till the next time.